So one of the things, I'll start with the beginning of the story. One of the things that I have often heard said colloquially, is the idea that, oh, I've got tons of renters in my neighborhood and they're ruining my neighborhood. And my response to that, or P.S., I've got tons of ASU renters in my neighborhood and they're ruining my neighborhood. And what I had never seen ever was any data about renters. I had never once seen anything to say where our renters are, how many renters we have, what percentage of a community is renters, anything like that. And the P.S. to that story is always, the renters are causing the problems, which I think is not a fair statement because it's like all things, there are good and bad and a whole array of people. Corey, how you doing there?
I'm good.
All right.
I'm a happy man.
Good. So what I asked originally to have happen was just to have some data pulled so that I would understand as a percentage of the whole who, in what neighborhoods, single-family neighborhoods, are there renters, what percentage of renters are there, so that when, so-and-so from such and such comes and says they're ruining my neighborhood, you can go, look, I've looked, and yeah, you've got 20% renters, this other neighborhood's got 50% renters, your neighborhood's got 2% renters. And so I'm not just working from the standpoint of, for examples. I also then had staff bring forward some information regarding code violations over a certain period of time. I think I picked a year just randomly, and then had that normalized for number of code violations per 100. I'm getting there, Skip, sit tight. And what I found was a whole lot of similarities. And what this all really comes down to, and this is what the gist of this whole presentation is the idea of cost shifting, right? There are certain people that we know cause the city to have more cost because of code violations, because of bad landlords, maybe because of bad renters, maybe just because of bad homeowners, whatever the case may be. But I wanted to actually look at some hard data at that and see if there were ways to do that cost shifting. Because as Mr. Pospisil, I believe, originally mentioned, the money that we currently get from the rental tax, the 2% rental tax, is not going towards fixing problems. They don't go towards codes enforcement. It's $2.6 million a year that goes towards a simple single thing, the general fund, right? And so that's my starting point for this discussion, is how do you look at this data in a way to try and find patterns in such a way that you can then cost shift to create the greatest value in neighborhoods that need the most attention. All right, and with all that wind up, we'll go to slide 1. So here's some of the things I found. We have homeowners associations and neighborhood associations with not a single registered rental, PS 85284. We also have areas with very high rentals that are registered. At least 50.5% that are registered. Realistically, is every rental registered? No. So probably it's more than 50.5%. And then the average in Tempe is we're about 17.6% rentals. When you start looking at nuisance code violations, what you see is we have neighborhoods, and these aren't all nuisance code violations. These are your grass is too tall, things like that. That we have areas where there is not a single code violation that's been called in. And I say called in because there's not someone who drives around looking for them anymore. Those people got cut in the budget cuts. We also have areas where as many as 75.2 violations occurred per 100 homes, right? So 7.5 out of every 10 homes had some issue. Or in some cases, there might be one house that had several issues. And then the average is about 13.9. That's a pretty big spread between the average and where our worst areas are. So go to the next slide. And what you see here is GIS mapping of what that looks like. On the left, you see the percentage of rentals within a neighborhood or homeowners association. And as you look in South Tempe, you'll see a whole bunch of, I'm a little bit colorblind, so maps don't do me a ton of good, but from what I've been told, a lot of teal, I'm going to go with, and green and light blue, areas that generally have very few code violations. And then as you head along to the 60, you start to see some green, which means now we're talking, rentals, very few rentals. This is the left picture. And then if you go to the middle of Tempe, you see a lot of light and dark green, which is now we're talking about 10, 20, 30% rentals. So to put that in perspective, and these are not apartments, these are only single family homes, generally speaking. So what you're talking about is if your house isn't a rental, your neighbor on the left or the right is, right? And then you get to the areas that we all know about, which is west of Mill Avenue, and in some areas south of Apache, where you're looking at 30 to 40% rentals. And of course, the winner of this contest is the Maple Ash neighborhood, which is at a little over 50% rentals. And that's, again, just the ones that we know about. Clearly, there's some sand in the system, and there are ones we don't know about. Now, if you look at the map on the right, that is the violations per 100 homes over a fixed period of time. It doesn't matter if I'd have done it for 5 years or 1 year or 6 months, as long as I got a reasonable sampling, because then you normalize it over that time period to show the spread. And you see it doesn't take much to look at the two maps side by side and to see the exact same thing. In South Tempe, very few code violations. Along the 60, some code violations, 14 to 20, generally speaking. And then as we get into North Tempe, you start to see where there are quite a few areas in orange and some areas in red. Now, just looking at this, you might think, well, is there really, you can sort of eyeball a correlation. If we go to the next slide, what you'll see, though, is the way that correlation actually plays out on a best fit line. So what you'll see on the left is the percentage of rentals at the whole. So at the very, very top, what you see, I wish I had a laser pointer now, is something just above the 50% line. That's Maple Ash. And then if you go to the right, it's just before 20, which means there's just less than 20 violations per 100 homes. And so what you see is as you go to the right, there's a pretty clear line here that tells us as you get more rentals, you get more violations. All right? And what happens is, and this is in your packet but not in the slide, is it actually becomes effectively a shelf. So that, and this, in your packet you'll see some regression analysis that was done on this by someone who's smarter at math with me, who makes it very clear that there's a direct correlation between percentage of rentals. It's just math, frankly. And my theory is this, is at a certain point, peer pressure breaks down, right? Where if there's a whole bunch of homeowners in a neighborhood and you've got a bad landlord or a bad renter, a nice old lady comes by with a box of cookies and says, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. P.S. We mow our lawn. And if you can't do it or you need help, let us know. And at a certain point, that pressure system starts to degenerate. And what you'll see is it's actually somewhere around the 20 to 25% rental area, where the nice, sweet little old lady doesn't keep coming by anymore. She moves to a new neighborhood, right? And so that system of P.S. we take care of our neighborhood starts to break down. And that's a pretty clear indicator on this chart. So what I looked at is, okay, where is that shelf, right? Where is the tipping point? And go to the next slide. And that shelf, if you look at the second one, is right around 20 to 25% rentals. Is where you get to some point where, I can give you an easy example. If you look at the regression analysis, what it effectively says is, when you go from 0 to 10%, you're going to add about 7 code violations per 100 homes. And that same number of about 7 per 100 code violations goes from 10 to 20%. It's a pretty linear line. You get to about 20, 25%, and it changes. It's no longer 7 out of 100 for every 10%. It starts going to 18 to 20 to 22 per 10%, because the line goes effectively like this, like a parabola. So there is a shelf there. And the question is, what do you do with the knowledge of knowing that at a certain shelving point, something different happens? And that something different is it costs the city more money, right? Through going out and doing code inspections actively, through going out and talking to people, to going out and doing abatements, to going out and doing all these things. We can go to the next thing. And so my suggestion would be this. First and foremost, let me just make sure I didn't miss anything on this. All right, let's just go to the next slide. So my suggestion would be this. In a larger sense, how do we cost shift to those that cost us the money that we know they're costing us? If we wanted to do it not as a fine, but as a cost shift, true cost shift, we wouldn't go out and charge someone $50, right? Because the cost of hiring a staff member, keeping them in office space, giving them a computer, having them go to court hearings, having them argue with people, having them get to the end result is not $50. It's like jaywalking, right? We're not charging you for what it costs us. We're charging you as a deterrent. If we really wanted to be a deterrent, if we really wanted to do that pure cost shifting, a citation for tall grass might cost you $500, because that's actually what it costs to pay the salary of the employee to do it. Probably not the way we want to do it. Who wants to get a $500 or $700 fine for tall grass? So my suggestion is this: since we know that there's a direct correlation in the trend between that shelf of 25-ish% of rentals, that we do a tiered system. That if you have less than 25% rentals in a single family, neighborhood association, HOA, everything stays the same, 2%, like we've always been charging. And it goes to the general fund. And I don't know where it goes in the general fund. It's money we spend on police and fire and parks and a whole lot of other things. But it's not specifically earmarked for code enforcement, because we don't have those anymore. And it's not specifically earmarked for neighborhood, let me finish and then you can criticize me. It's not specifically earmarked for neighborhood grants. It's not specifically earmarked for a bunch of things, even though we know that there are certain areas that take more of that money. And so my suggestion would be this: for those certain areas, that we have a tiered system of something like 4%. So if you live in an area with more than 25% rentals in single-family homes, that would then be a 4% rate. That would generate something like $600,000 a year. Right? With $600,000 a year, you can solve our code enforcement issue. You can solve our rental issue. You can solve a lot of issues related to streetlights, related to a whole series of things that right now are suffering because of, frankly, rational choices the city has had to make because of budget cuts. And what you would do is it wouldn't go to the general fund. That increase of from 2 to 4% for a portion of those homes, portion of those communities, would go specifically to helping those communities be a more livable environment and potentially drive up rental rates in those neighborhoods, because now you've got a place that's more enticing to people that want to live. So that's my pitch. My hope would be that this would go to a committee to look at the viability of this. Obviously, this is a discussion that's going to take place over many meetings and many smart people. But my hope is this is the starting point, and at the very least, as this goes through the metamorphosis process, that at least there's a system and a record of this is what I originally thought would work. Is that my last slide? I think so. And the only thing I would mention is there's 2 more slides in your packet that show not a best fit line, but an actual true line which shows that parabola, and it shows some slightly better color pictures of what we've got.
Councilmember Woods.